Hello and welcome to the third episode of A Closer Look on Brunei. My name is Simona Grano and I'm Senior Lecturer and Director of the Taiwan Studies Project at the University of Zurich. So, first of all, some important facts. The independent Islamic Sultanate Brunei Darussalam is a small country that covers an area of 5,765 square kilometers on the island of Borneo. It is roughly 14% the size of Switzerland, slightly bigger than the canton of Valais, Valdis. Brunei is a member of the Commonwealth and ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. As can be seen on the map, the Sultanate is divided into two non-contiguous territories that are actually separated by the Malaysian state of Sarawak. The western segment is the larger of the two and contains the capital city of Bandar Seri Begawan. The north of Brunei has a coastline of about 161 kilometers along the South China Sea. Now, Brunei boasts a well-educated population, excellent infrastructure, and a stable government. The official language is Malay, and English is also widely spoken. Nearly 2/3 of the population of Brunei are classified officially as Malay. This category, however, includes not only ethnic Malays, but also a number of indigenous peoples, namely the Dusun, Belait, Kedayan, Murut, and Bisaya. Chinese make up about 1/10 of the population. Brunei's population is predominantly Sunni Muslim, while its Chinese population follows Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, or Christianity. Some of the indigenous peoples are Christian, while others follow local religions. Now, Brunei's Human Development Index ranks 47th out of 189 countries. It is second among the ASEAN countries after Singapore and before Malaysia. Brunei ranks higher than Sri Lanka and Uzbekistan, which we covered in previous episodes of this series. Just for those of you who don't know, a country scores higher Human Development Index when the lifespan in the country is higher, when the education level is higher, and the gross national income per capita is higher. The climate in Brunei is tropical equatorial, governed by equatorial monsoon winds. About 74% of Brunei is covered by rainforest, the majority of which is actually still unspoiled and protected, and home to numerous types of wildlife. Brunei is also famous in Southeast Asia for its gorgeous mosques and for its Islamic architecture. Agriculture, fishing, and forestry, once the mainstays of Brunei's economy, declined in importance after the discovery of petroleum resources in the 1920s. By the end of the 20th century, these three activities accounted for just a tiny fraction of the gross domestic product and employed comparably small segments of the workforce. Now, since the discovery of petroleum resources in the 1920s, Brunei's economy has largely been dependent, of course, on gas and oil revenues, making it one of the highest per capita income countries in Asia. Brunei has a GDP per capita which is higher than Malaysia, but lower than Singapore, and is classified as a high-income country by the World Bank. Now, recognizing the need to diversify the economy, the Bruneian government wants to develop other industries such as information and communications technology and halal manufacturing, permissible under Islamic law. Let me now give you some information on the history of Brunei. A British protectorate since 1888, Brunei was the only Malay state which chose to remain a British dependency in 1963, rather than join the federation that eventually became Malaysia. Full independence for Brunei came relatively late in 1984. The Sultan of Brunei, Hassan al-Bolkiah, was crowned in August 1968 following the abdication of his father, Sir Haji Omar Ali Saifuddin. He is one of the world's longest reigning and few remaining absolute monarchs. Upon Brunei's independence in 1984, he appointed himself prime minister and in 1991 introduced an ideology called Malay Muslim monarchy, which presented the monarch as the defender of the faith. The Sultan is one of the world's richest individuals, and in a country where the standard of living is actually very high, appears to enjoy genuine popularity among his subjects. More recently, however, and this is something we'll cover with our two speakers briefly, he has faced some criticism over the introduction of Islamic Sharia law in the country. Let me now introduce our two speakers for today. First of all, the Honorable Iswandy Ahmad is a member of the Legislative Council of Brunei as a person who has achieved distinction. He regularly delivers capacity building programs for leadership development for young Brunei leaders and is an active advocate in civil society. Among his voluntary social contributions are HIV and AIDS work on awareness and advocacy, youth mentorship, and employability among job seekers. Dr. Vanessa Teo, our second speaker, is a founder of Agrone, an agriculture technology platform that provides digital farm certifications to ensure farm product quality and safety. She pursued her doctorate degree specializing in rice crop modeling and agricultural systems modeling. Her research focused on utilizing modeling systems and algorithms to support rice farming system optimization in Brunei. Welcome to the two of you. Now we start with a few brief introductory questions, and let me remind you, this is a very brief part and your answer should be, if possible, a bit concise. So let's start with you, Vanessa. I'd like to ask you, what fascinates you most about Brunei, and also what concerns you most about your country?
Thank you so much, Dr. Simona, for the introduction. I guess one of the things that, just a little sharing about Brunei, one of the things that people really love, no matter where they come from, is the fact that Brunei has one of the most beautiful sunsets, which is really incomparable to other countries. And being from Brunei is definitely a conversation starter when we always say that, we only have a population of estimated 400,000 people. People tend to be quite shocked with that number. And at the same time, sharing that Brunei is a tax-free nation and healthcare and education is provided for free. I think thinking about the future for Brunei, I guess my concern is really how are we going to start diversifying our economy? What are the job opportunities for our new generation of graduates? And how can we be part of that solution? And thinking about that, especially for the agriculture sector as well.
Thank you, Vanessa. Great. So Iswandy, next one would be for you. If you only had a few words, and I know this is quite difficult task for you, how would you judge the current state of your country regarding society, politics, and the economy?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Simona. So if I were to combine those three aspects in a short paragraph, is Brunei Darussalam, as mentioned by Dr. Vanessa, is a peaceful country which is governed by, as per introduction, by His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassan Al Bolkiah, who is a caring and mocking monarch who puts his subjects' welfare as a priority, as mentioned by Dr. Vanessa, with the benefits that we have. And as many would know, Brunei's economy is driven by its petroleum industry, where the country is actually heading towards a diversification or a development effort, or with the Brunei Vision 2035, or locally known as Wawasan Brunei 2035, which has three main goals, namely the well-educated and highly skilled people, high quality of life, and dynamic and sustainable economy. I guess that's enough if I would put it into a few words.
Thank you for being so brief and concise, and of course, still a very well developed answer. So the other question, Vanessa, could also be for you. What is the biggest misconception people have about Brunei? What do you think?
I think one of the misconceptions maybe for people on the other side of the world, maybe in Europe, or while I was living in the UK for about 7 years, one of the misconceptions when people think about Brunei is that there are mainly only Malay Muslim people living in the country. But actually, Brunei is a multi-ethnic society. We have a actually quite a large community of Chinese people, Indian people, and indigenous races as well. So I think that shows that we have a multi-ethnic society.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Iswandy, where do you see Brunei if you had to compare it to actually your neighboring country of Malaysia?
All right. I would say if Malaysia puts emphasis on the multicultural image, Brunei would be a country with strong culture and tradition, mixed with modern development. So for example, you would see our landmark, the Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin Mosque or the Jami Asri Mosque that you see in the webcast introduction just now, in the capital city, Bandar Seri Begawan, with people in their working attire and driving their cars and latest gadgets. But they go to the mosque during the prayers to do their obligations. And the attendees are a mix of Malays, Indians, and also other ethnicity. Although one has to have a keen eye to see the differences between Malaysia and Brunei, or even Singapore and Indonesia, as we come from the same cultural roots. So someone who has been to Malaysia or Singapore, if they come to Brunei, they might say, hey, I've seen or I've eaten this type of cuisine before in Malaysia, because basically we come from the same roots anyway.
Okay. Thank you very much. What another question that I think actually could be addressed for both of you. What is the one thing people should know about you to actually better understand your view or your perspective on your home country and today's topics?
My specific background as an agriculture entrepreneur in Brunei, we focus a lot on implementation of smart farm IoTs and farm certifications. We have a goal in ensuring that smallholder farmers have the right tools and knowledge to not only have better quality products, but human safety for the workers as well, as most of them don't have formal education when they became a farmer. So we actually apply training for them so that they can get the education that they require to ensure they're safe being on the farms as well.
Thank you very much. So I think we can say, of course, that your background and your studies give you insight in all the questions we'll ask about, for example, the developing of this Wawasan vision for the future, right? Specifically for your fields. What about you, Iswandy? Would you also tell us something about yourself to understand, to give us an insight on what is your take on the topics in your country?
As a member of the parliament, or what we call locally as legislative council members, so it's basically the involvement or the participation of the subjects or people in the country's development. Brunei's political scene is pretty much a bit in its infancy. As you may know, we only reinstated back our parliament or legislative council in 2004, but the movement among the civil society is growing. So post-independence, there has been a bit of a quietness in terms of civil society, but now we have more, especially participation from young people, women, or even in the sports scene. So people are voicing out their concerns rather than becoming opposition. They're becoming towards togetherness, or when we call in the local context shura, or they meet each other to find the solutions to problems or the challenges that we have currently. So I guess that's where the angle that I'll be coming from for today.
Thank you, both of you, Vanessa and Iswandy, for keeping the time so brilliantly. Now we actually go into the main part of today's interview and talk with you. So you actually also are allowed, of course, to give more answers that are a bit less concise and much more developed. So for the next 25 minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to talk more in detail about the monarchy, its visions for Brunei's role in the region, and some geopolitical aspects of Brunei's role in the region. So in Brunei, just for the audience also, in regime studies, Brunei Darussalam is typically cast as an absolute monarchy, in some renditions the most coercive form of rule. But in practice, actually, the Sultanate's politics remain relatively benign. So Brunei is the only remaining Malay Islamic monarchy in the world. And to this extent, Iswandy, I'd like to ask a question to you. What can you tell us about the characteristics of this unique form of government, and what is the role of the Sultan, who is both head of the state and head of the government?
Okay, right. Thank you, Doctor, on the question. I guess let's start with a context of Brunei. So Brunei is governed by His Majesty the Sultan. So the current Sultan is Sultan Haji Hassan al-Bolkiah Muzaddin wa Daulah, and he's the 29th Sultan in the lineage, and the country follows the Malay Islamic monarchy, as mentioned, which is the national philosophy that underscores the Malay and Islamic values and traditions in our way of life. So how Islam or the religion come in? So Islam came to Brunei over about 600 years ago, and that's where we have our first Sultan. And Islam is the official religion. Other beliefs and religion can be practiced in Brunei, and this is evidently by the statistics or the graph that was shared earlier, where we have Chinese and we have also other ethnicity. And in fact, the Chinese New Year or Christmas are both public holidays in Brunei. So it's celebrated, or it's celebrated by those who practice it. Touching a bit on the Sharia penal code, the Sharia law. So Brunei practices a dual system where both civil law and Sharia law runs in parallel. So where he protects all citizens and visitors in Brunei. His Majesty is the head of state and the Prime Minister himself, where he often makes unscheduled visits to the government departments and point out various improvements needed to better serve the public, and is well loved by his subjects. And every year during the Legislative Council that we meet every March, this is where the political scene is getting more active because everyone follows the Legislative Council session, and this is where the national development issues are being discussed openly by Legislative Council members to the ministers who has to answer it on the spot. So it spends about 2 weeks, and where the public follows it on newspaper, television, and even social media.
Iswandy, just a short follow-up question that would interest me, and I think the audience as well. Can you say something maybe about the role of the Sultan in everyday life, if there is such a role or such an engagement?
If I were to put into a context, is His Majesty is like a father figure to Bruneians. He's also a working monarch, so he doesn't just reside in the palace, but he works. So he goes down to visit people. So for example, every Friday he'll go to different mosques in Brunei just to spend the day to spend the Friday prayers with the subjects. And this is where everyone can see him and even take selfies or take photos. And even pre-COVID, people actually greet to him and shake hands with him. And basically, His Majesty is a figurehead that is well loved by the subjects. And even when tourists come to Brunei, this is the nearest that he can come to a head of state and even speak for a few seconds or even minutes if he allows it to.
Okay, excellent. The third question is also for you, Iswandy. Before we go into the more agricultural part of the interview, I'd be interested to know, because you, of course, have been a member of the Legislative Council in Brunei since 2017 as a person who has achieved distinction. And just for the public, this council was disbanded, and 20 years later, it was actually able to take up its work again in 2004, and is now composed, if I'm not mistaken, by 21 appointed members. So the question I would like to ask you, first of all, can you tell us a bit about the background on how is it possible to become a member of the council, and what made you join, and also what could you achieve so far as a member of the council?
All right. So I'll try to explain it as concise but as straightforward as possible. So Brunei Legislative Council has members.
Take your consisting.
Time. Okay. So Brunei Legislative Council has members that consist of ex officio, i.e. that these are the ministers representing the government of His Majesty. And we also, on the other side, we have people who are appointed and elected even. So we have people with titles, or those who are awarded with titles from the government. And also we have people who achieve distinctions, where I come in. So I come in with my background in the NGO world, in my HIV and AIDS work and volunteerism. And those who are coming from the sub-districts or the village representatives, these are what we call locally as penghulu or ketua kampung, where these are elected members into the council. So these elected members and everyone who are appointed there voice out the concerns or the needs of the people. And how to become a member of the Legislative Council? I guess you have to be prominent in your field for those who achieve distinction with these titles, and for those who are representing the villages and sub-districts, basically you're elected as the village head, and also the penghulu. I guess if one wants to be appointed, he or she needs to work hard and show prominence in their field. But then there's also the representative as village head if you want to represent your constituencies, like a regional or physical constituency there. I hope that's
okay.
clear.
So absolutely. So if I understood you correctly, basically for those who have achieved distinction, you have to have achieved something positive, of course, some positive results in your field. I guess for you, that would be also what we introduced at first when we talked about your advocacy and the civil society sector, which we'll also go into more in detail later. So the next question, Vanessa, is not entirely on the agricultural sector first, but I'd like to ask you from the agricultural sphere, and I think Iswandy can also add to that from his own perspective. We know that Brunei has been quite successful in managing the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'd like to know from the both of you, first of all, what does this show us about Brunei, and how does the system work, right? Maybe you can give us some examples from your specific fields.
Sure, yeah. I think especially in the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, that was really a lot of uncertainty, especially as they were infected individuals that started coming up. So that really resulted in the Brunei government and alongside with the ministries to start coming out with a lot of strict guidelines and also a lot of support for businesses. I think that personally reflected on our business as well. A lot of support such as subsidies in reduced rentals, implementing support in payment of salaries for staff to ensure to minimize the cuts on letting go people in your company, and as well development of online portals to ensure that businesses can actually still go on even with restrictions and in a way lockdown, inability for us as well to connect with the smallholder farmers. We actually allowed them to sell on these platforms. Overall, I think the government worked in a sense that they provided everyone a sense of security and clear guidance, which I felt at that time was something the community really needed, as everyone was quite fearful and uncertain about what it would mean for them personally, for their health, for the healthcare system, and of course the businesses. I think for us, when looking back at it, at the heart of it, what we really saw was that the government really helped us to control the pandemic, but it was a mutual trust between the people and the government in a really unknown territory. So every day, I believe a lot of the people in Brunei was linking in at 6 p.m. or is it 5 p.m. for the Ministry of Health's announcements and what the guidelines are going to be this week. I think that just showed a mutual trust and working sort of week by week on what was going to happen. Yeah, that was pretty much what happened.
Yeah, this is a very important issue, the one between trust between the government and, of course, the population that we also see in other Asian countries such as Taiwan, I would say. Iswandy, would you like to add something to that?
Oh, yes, definitely. So as Dr. Vanessa mentioned, it was a very scary time, if we're going to use that word, last year. So everyone was stuck at home and referring, because there was a lot of misinformation. But the government was doing this press conference every 5 p.m. or so. And it's not just like a director or a doctor, but this is the Minister of Health himself who gives the briefing. So this is like the highest form of leadership in the ministry. And not just himself, but also the other ministers from the other ministries. So for example, if there was something on food security, so the Minister of Primary Resources and Tourism will give the briefing. And if there's anything about concern about finances or banking issues, so the Minister of Finance and Economy will give the briefing. So that was important on that one. And this is unprecedented before. We had town halls where people can ask directly to the representative of the government, which is like minister or directors. But this is actually live on television and radio, where people actually, or the journalists ask live questions, and these ministers have to ask directly live. And that was something that, as Dr. Vanessa mentioned, the trust was there, and people were following all these information. And at the same time, if there's any misinformation or rumors or even fake news going around, this is dispelled on the spot during these press conferences. And that was very helpful, especially in managing the pandemic.
Okay, and what may I ask the both of you, what is the current situation in terms of COVID-19 and the vaccination?
Dr. Vanessa, you want to share?
I do believe we are quite lucky in a sense that Brunei, in a way, in the country is pretty much business as usual. We are able to go out, everyone's back in office, and sort of the economy, surprisingly, is also booming, because I think for the majority of Bruneians, they love to travel and, especially spend outside the country. But I think now everyone being forced to spend in the country does also allow local businesses to really grow and then have the opportunity to do more things as well. So, and yeah, for the vaccination program, we've also gone through different phases. So now we've gone through, now the current one is for the elderly and at-risk groups, and then we'll go by phase after that.
So if I can add, so to put into context, we don't, the last local transmission was over a year ago, about 300 plus days over a year ago. So we still have import cases, but these import cases directly go towards quarantine hotels or places they've been to. So it's been under control, and I think we're quite lucky where we are, where other countries are facing second, third, or even fourth wave. Brunei are basically business as usual. Having said that, complacency is not is something that we don't tolerate. So people still have to wear masks or don't go out, and we still keep reminding whenever you receive invitation, if you're sick, do not enter this venue or do not attend. So that's still being practiced, and you have to sign in and sign out whenever you enter public buildings.
Okay, thank you very much for this interesting outlook on how the situation is actually in Brunei. Now let me go into introducing just very briefly the next topic up for our conversation. In 2007, His Majesty the Sultan consented to the establishment of a national vision called Wawasan Brunei Vision 2035, which provides for the promotion of investments both in downstream industries and economic clusters beyond the oil and gas industry, which we also mentioned before. Now, the aim, Ishwan already said it before, is also for Brunei Darussalam to be recognized for three things, namely its highly educated, skilled, and accomplished population, and the high quality of life in Brunei, and of course, its dynamic and sustainable economy. Now, the first question in this regard would be actually for you, Vanessa. As part of this vision, Brunei also wants to further develop its agricultural sector. So where do you see the potential of the agricultural sector in Brunei? And given that the country is very small, and as we mentioned before, part of its land is also under protection, can you also maybe give us a bit of background on the availability of arable land in Brunei?
I guess I can give a little bit of context as well. So before I founded Agrom, I was part of the IBM Research Lab in Brunei back in 2013. Back in 2013, actually, the Brunei government purchased the Blue Gene P, which was the fastest computer in the world from IBM. And they developed a lab in which the agriculture department posed the question or posed a challenge to IBM in identifying where are the gaps in our agriculture sector and how can we optimize it with supercomputing. I think even back then in 2013, that actually highlighted how forward-thinking the government actually was, especially in a time where not many organizations or researchers at the time were looking at data modeling for optimization, especially in our region. So with that, I felt that enabled a lot of spurs of project and research that were able to come out of these research that was developed. Even now, back in 2019, there was a release of more than 7,000 hectares of arable land that was launched that actually provided for everyone, both locally and foreigners, to come in for a subsidized rental rate. They were looking into any kind or open to any kind of technologies, going from vertical farms, looking at how there is a limit in terms of land. However, they are emphasizing smart farm solutions, smart farm IoT solutions, looking at indoor LED systems, and also new ways of operating farms that can be tested or done as pilots in the country. So I feel there is huge changes in the agriculture sector, especially in the last few years, where the new farmers that have come in, they have already identified opportunities for other markets, meaning they've already secured contracts, for example, with China in terms of purchasing their products and their resources or the fruits that they actually be harvesting in a few years' time. So I think that is kind of the model in which we operate. And the agriculture department actually works in terms of not just looking at the farm being developed, but what is the actual long-term vision and business model for the farm.
So in regard to what you just said now, maybe can you tell us something about the future possible contribution of the agricultural sector to GDP in relation, for example, to other sectors in this plan?
I think there's definitely a need to increase food security, first of all, internally in the country. Right now, we stand about 5% self-sufficiency. There is a target to hit 20-30% for self-sufficiency. Export being definitely an important factor for us to increase the GDP, but there is also a huge challenge for us to ensure that there is food security for our country within Brunei. So I think the government looking at it both ways, both in terms of GDP growth, but at the same time ensuring food security within country as well.
Excellent. Well, the next question is now actually for both of you, and it's a question that has been posed by one of the speakers of our last episode on Uzbekistan, Dr. Tolipov. He'd like to know from the both of you, in terms of social, economic, and political developments within Brunei, what demonstrates, first of all, that Brunei is working towards this new vision. I think what he also means is, of course, has something been achieved already in this plan? And could Brunei possibly position itself as a new tiger or a miracle in Southeast Asia? Iswandy, would you like to go first?
Okay. So let me start with the second question before I answer about tiger or miracle of Southeast Asia. So among as people know, our main source of economy is the hydrocarbon sector, and I don't think so it's going anytime soon. Although although there are efforts on, or there are concern about the environmental impacts and whatnot, but of course based on the efforts, so there are the 4 national goals of economic diversification. So one is the high and sustainable economic growth, hopefully not affected by the economic uncertainty. So hence the economic diversification that we are going through. Second is as I mentioned, the economic diversification to divert away from the contribution of oil and gas sector. So the third one is the macroeconomic stability, which include the moderate inflation growth, fiscal sustainability, and also trade surplus. And the fourth one, we touched a bit on low unemployment rate, which is a concern for many in Brunei. And according to the 15-year economic blueprint, there are the 5 priority sectors in diversifying the economy. So we're looking at 1, downstream oil and gas; 2, food, which is halal, including halal manufacturing; 3 is tourism, which I think is affected very much about the COVID-19. 4th is the information and communication technology, or ICT, and 5 is the services. So going back to the question about will Brunei is targeting to be the new tiger or the miracle in Southeast Asia? Personally, in my humble opinion, we're looking at survivability and also sustainability. Because Brunei always looks at things as balances. So whenever we develop, for example, developing as a country, we are a country that has no skyscrapers, but we're also looking at, we don't leave anyone to live in the slums or being homeless. So we're trying to have a balanced growth. So I guess if you were to see in Southeast Asia, we try to be at least comparable, if not a slightly better, or at least looking at others as benchmark. So that's my take on it in Brunei for Southeast Asian economy.
Thank you. Vanessa, would you like to add something regarding your sector?
Sure. I think, being like how you define exactly what the new tiger of Southeast Asia, I guess for us in the agriculture sector, I do believe that Brunei has so many variety of fresh vegetables, produce, and other crops that are still not unknown to the bigger market, to the global market. So I think one of the interesting things that, especially being in agriculture and in downstream processing, there's so many opportunities for new flavors of food items, dessert items, and food projects that can actually develop in Brunei and actually be the next Tabasco, or be the next product that is really known within Brunei for that. So I think that's kind of the sector we're trying to develop and be creative with what we have to offer in Brunei, which is really relatively unknown.
Excellent. I look forward to discover the new Tabasco or special product. I love eating. So Iswandy, the next question would be for you, and it's related, of course, to your special field in mentoring younger generations, and also what has ultimately also allowed you to establish, of course, your special role as a personal distinction. So I'd like to ask you, because you've been mentoring, of course, young people and job seekers, the main aspirations, could you tell us maybe something about the main aspirations of young people in Brunei and whether you think this can be met?
So we recently held the Brunei National Youth Congress in 2019, where the last one was held more than 10 years ago, before that, which is in 2008, where this Congress is where young people talk about aspiration, challenges, and way forward for national development in Brunei. So visualize it as like a youth parliament, but with young people presenting their ideas, concerns, and thoughts directly towards ministers or representatives from the government. And back in 2017, as we have discussed, the Legislative Council had youth representatives. So myself is one of them, and another one is YB Khairunisa, who are appointed as member of parliament. So this shows that the country don't just want the young people in Brunei just to be a recipient of the national development efforts, but also as active contributors. And in fact, every 1st August, the National Youth Day is celebrated and observed in Brunei. And this is where the recognition of young people's or youth contribution is acknowledged countrywide. And attending that national event is His Majesty and the Royal Family consent to engage with young people during the day, be it from NGOs, schools, businesses, and public sector alike. So in short, the young people's aspirations are continuously being met, and there will always be new challenges. For example, 10 years ago, it was unheard of a creative industry, but nowadays we have young people who demand or requesting creative industry to be at least recognized in our policies or in law. So that's something interesting to look at.
Thank you. And related to actually what you have just said, Iswandy, Vanessa, what is the role of young job seekers in the agricultural sector? Who works in the agricultural sectors? Are younger generation actually motivated to work in the agricultural sector still?
I think this is definitely a huge challenge for us as well, specifically as less and less people want to enter the agricultural sector. And this is definitely why this actually faced globally, and furthering the food security challenge of feeding 9 billion people by 2050 is the fact that nobody wants to enter the workforce. With Agro, I think especially with my company, what we try to do is that we're developing the concept of agriculture entrepreneurs, whereby it's not just conventional farming where you go out in the field and you start taking your tools and going in the field. It's really developing a business that connects your farms to the marketplaces, identifying where your channels are. And we try to go into it with the mindset of what young people want today. People want freedom with their time. They want to feel fulfilled and see the work that they've actually put into their the time that they put into it. So we provide training and ensure that these new farmers have the right skills. We provide them with the full trench of branding training, and at the same time define business models to ensure that when they do start their farms, they will have a marketplace in which they can enter. This all of a sudden becomes a better game, a better setup for these new farmers, because they become sort of the entrepreneurial mindset, which is very on trend right now. I think this is sort of how we have to start looking at how we're going to get more people into the workforce, is to identify what do these new workforce individuals want, and how can we actually adapt to that as well. And it'll be a hand, working alongside each other to identify what it would be.
Okay, well, our second speaker last time also had a question for you, Dilfuza Kurolova. She would be interested to know, because she also herself worked in the civil society sector in Uzbekistan. So she would like to know from you something more about the role of civil society in Brunei, and whether you could say something about it given the country's, she said, political and economic constraints, some perspective from the government, from Iswandy, and maybe more from the agricultural sector from Vanessa.
Yeah. Thank you, Simona, on this one. I guess to contextualize it, Brunei being a small population, about 400,000, not even 500,000, I guess we are blessed with a relatively easy to reach community with a small geographical area. So even in the most remote area, it's relatively easy to access. But that also means, being a small population, our human resources are also limited. So our civil society scene in Brunei is mostly volunteer-based. I don't know many who are working full-time for the civil society they are in. Most of them are volunteers, even those who I've engaged with. And mostly are on community, businesses, arts, sports, women, and youth focus. Nevertheless, their work is commendable, especially in assisting the underprivileged, humanitarian work, creative industry, and voicing out matters or national matters. For example, recently we have those who are voicing out on not just HIV and AIDS, but also on mental health, reproductive health, and even sexual harassment. So topics that were considered taboo back those in the years, but now it's coming up and people are engaging in constructive conversation to find solutions, at least starting a conversation on issues that has never been discussed before, especially on the civil society side.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Now, before we go into the final topic of this interview and then into the Q&A, is there something brief you want to tell us about, for example, the digitalization strategy of Brunei?
Oh, the digitalization strategy. I guess I'll start first, and maybe Dr. Vanessa can put some aspect on it. So we have the Digital Economy Master Plan that was released quite recently. So it's the Digital Economy Master Plan 2025. So it's driving the initiative with the appointment of a Digital Economy Council. It's not just government agencies are the members, but also representatives from the civil society and also the private sector. Some areas that are given focus are the adoption of Industrial Revolution 4.0, and also the government digitalization. So before, if people were to request for any government services, it's through paper and pen. But now people can access it online, which is a good thing. And initiatives also on data protection and cyber security, and also lifelong learning for talent development in the digital economy. So this morning, I was just talking to a young person who was interning with me, and she mentioned, oh, I'm attending this course on the Job Center, which is an agency on upskilling in Brunei, where she's being sponsored about 200 Brunei dollars to upskill while she's searching for a job. So that's something that I guess the government is doing through this Digital Economy Master Plan as a whole of nation that's being contributed.
Would you like something to add to that, Vanessa? Or
yeah, I guess especially I guess a little bit on our background as well. When Agrom started, we were basically an agri-tech platform, and we enrolled with the government's first initiative to support startups in a program called 100 Days Startup Bootcamp. There was a whole lot of emphasis on digital solutions that can be developed through the Startup Bootcamp, and looking for ways to develop entrepreneurs that can enter the market with the products that they've developed. I think that was one of the initial programs in which I joined in which allowed really young people to really explore what it would mean to build a startup in Brunei, and then look for boundaries outside of Brunei to bring it to market and get that and chase that unicorn startup dream, sort of things like that. I think that was the first of its kind, especially in the last few years that I've seen. And I think for smart farming, especially in Brunei, we were definitely more towards the conventional farming route. But then now we're going into more smart farm technology. As I mentioned, that we are now seeing more and more drone companies helping to do data gathering and analyzing for for better farm results. And then more and more the farmers are getting more open to ideas of entering data into mobile apps and then getting farm reports, as that is what we are currently doing for them. And with this data that we're monitoring and providing advice, we then also connect them to local markets and overseas markets. So we definitely see a lot of traction and a lot of movement in the sector.
Excellent. Now, before we go into the Q&A, let's talk just briefly a bit more about Brunei's role within ASEAN, its foreign relations and its allies. And I think one of the questions I see has also been asked by the public. This is for you, I would say, Iswandy.
Yeah.
What is Brunei's role within ASEAN as a small country, and where are the current challenges faced by Brunei as chair of ASEAN?
Okay. So as the current chair of ASEAN this year, so we come during a time where the challenge is we need coordinated approach and joint action. I guess people know the challenges about the South China Sea and what's happening on the humanitarian aspects in the region. So the theme for this year's chairmanship, as was shared publicly already, it's we care, we prepare, and we prosper. And it comes at a time of a pandemic. It comes a time where we need to ensure that to take care of the community, which is the people, and to prepare for whatever challenges that's coming, be it climate change, health crisis, or geopolitical challenges there. And definitely to ensure the economic growth and the community is taken care of. So a good example was when there was a call to address the issue on humanitarian issue. So Brunei agreed to chair a meeting in Indonesia at the ASEAN Secretariat to discuss with the 10 countries, with Myanmar and also the other countries. So that was something that Brunei does. And I think with this good relations that we have with other ASEAN countries, we managed to come up with a few way forward solutions that can be publicly assessed already on the solutions that we're looking at for that matter.
And Vanessa, would you also like to add, for example, are there some kind of collaboration in the agricultural section with ASEAN?
Yeah, I guess, as a whole, ASEAN really focuses on, how can we help the smallholder farmers, which, is over 100 million smallholder farmers in ASEAN. one of the biggest challenges is food safety and food quality. So through the ASEAN, there is an ASEAN GAP Secretariat, which is the Good Agricultural Practices. They developed a certification in 2014 that allows each country to develop the GAP certification. So Brunei has their own version of the Brunei GAP, and Malaysia has their own version, and so on and so forth. With this certification, what it does is that with each smallholder farmer that has been verified GAP certified, they have the ability to actually cross-border trade a lot faster and a lot of less verification steps, and also more credibility in the market, meaning fetching better prices. This is a way that we try to work together to ensure that our smallholder farmers are being uplifted, especially economically, and as well at the same time uplifting their knowledge. And for Agrom as well, we are part of the BIM IAGA network, which is the Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East Asian Growth Network, whereby all these countries as well are working together, whereby we signed an MOU to help to digitalize smallholder farmers, looking at not only accessing markets, but as well enabling on the ground, increase our performance and productivity with more tools and knowledge and support.
Excellent. Now, let me bring in one final question that deals more with geopolitics. So when we actually look at geopolitics more broadly and the rising role of China in the world, and especially, of course, in Southeast Asia as connected to Brunei, the US, ASEAN, and the Muslim world, where does Brunei position itself, and who are its closest allies and partners in the area and in the world? Maybe Iswandy, would you like to take this?
Right. In my personal opinion, and then when following of these geopolitical news, I always see Brunei as that good friend to everyone and good citizen of the world. So the respect that we show to others are mutually returned, and that makes us having good relationship, regardless with small or big countries. So and I guess this shows we're balanced with the relationship that we have, either be it from the east or the west, or those who are big countries or small countries. And I guess that's where we are heading with having this mutual relationship, mutual respect that we show with others and having good relationship.
Thank you. Now, let me bring in some questions from the audience. So one by John James Pachuharson: how would you summarize Brunei's relationship with China? It also deals with China, and specifically actually with regard to the 9 dashed line, which runs not far off the coast of Brunei.
Maybe if I can just chime in a bit on this one. I guess it's every country's sovereignty that needs to be protected. So Brunei is also having a claim based on the rule of law that we were having there. So I guess it's being handled diplomatically, and I guess the communication is being done. So the claim can be done publicly by any countries, but again, then we have the rules of law that we need to follow. I guess that's where we're heading towards, and in base of the rule of law that we are going forward.
Vanessa, this question could be for you, and it's actually about Brunei's plans to move to a carbon-free economy, and also how widespread is solar power in Brunei.
Yes, there are definitely a lot of moves going towards a carbon-free economy. I think not only that, and not just carbon-free, but I think looking at how can Brunei be more sustainable, and looking at how, especially in areas of reduction of waste, looking at more renewable energy. I believe there's already a solar power plant that was first initiated by Shell Brunei. So now there's a solar power plant that's is a first phase, and there'll be more solar power plants to be initiated within Brunei. I think there's definitely a commitment there. And at the same time, there's a lot of emphasis on waste management and how we can actually develop new opportunities or ways to be more sustainable. I think for us, especially in Brunei, our waste contributes to 30%, 36% of our waste produced. So there are a lot of projects or a lot of NGO groups looking at how can we upcycle or develop compost, or develop new fertilizer opportunities with these products. So, and I believe they're coming in from not only from the government, it's coming in from the private sectors, NGOs that have sprouted out, and also companies that are looking to minimize their waste, and at the same time looking at how they can provide basically contribute to the SDG goals as a whole.
Thank you, Vanessa, for this very comprehensive answer. I think, Iswandy, the next question could be for you, and somebody, Claudia Demosier, is wondering if you could tell us something more about the selection process for judges. I think this question is related to the initial explanation you gave us about the two different kinds of law, Sharia law and, of course, civil law. She'd like to know, for example, what is the basic knowledge these judges have to have, right, in which of the two laws, and also how you can explain maybe something a bit more to us in detail about the process, how they are selected.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with the system and how they're being chosen on this one, but I've met them personally, and I guess what I can tell is they are experts in the field. So these are people who are studying the legal system or even the Sharia system extensively. So in terms of expertise, they are very well versed in the area, both either, for example, if they're appointed on the civil or even the Sharia law, and they are well respected members of the society in Brunei, and I'm pretty sure they are chosen based on their merits on the position that they are having.
And one question by Andre Brandley was also related to this, and what he was wondering whether you could comment on the sort of the independence of the judiciary system in Brunei.
So we have three different system, which is the administrative or the executive, and also the judiciary, and also the legislative council. Though although in Brunei that everyone reports to the Sultan, everyone practices on their own. So for example, the legislative council, whenever we meet, the minister, the cabinet don't limit us what we question, for example. And so but that doesn't mean they cannot that doesn't mean that, for example, the other way around, for example, that we cannot question what the policy the government is doing on this one. So whenever there are laws or there are acts being pursued in Brunei, it needs to be approved by the legal system or the judiciary on that one. So that's how it works. It interacts with each other, but it doesn't go on the other side to meddle with the process that is supposed to be in one system.
Vanessa, the next question be for you, and actually relates to whether you could tell us something about how many organic products from sustainable production there are in Brunei, and whether you think that Brunei could sort of become the center of organic products in the region.
It's interesting that that question was posed. I saw that one. That's definitely something that we are working towards, and that is one of the goals that we are trying to achieve for our farmers in Brunei, is because the GAP certification is the first level of certification for farmers, especially knowing that smallholder farmers in Asia and ASEAN are mainly primary educated, and first of all, a lot of them didn't go for formal training to become farmers. So with this GAP certification, that's just the first layer of quality certification. Then moving towards that is actually getting organic certification, so that they can actually enter higher value markets that would really put a better price on their products. So for Brunei, we really have an opportunity to become that central platform, and at the same time providing the training tools and knowledge to enable smallholder farmers to achieve those.
Well, I see that we actually have a lot of questions, so it's actually a testimony to the fact that our two speakers were actually very, very good in doing their job. But we are unfortunately nearing the end of this conversation. I would like to thank you. You did a wonderful job in outlining complicated issues, actually dealing with Brunei's political system, geopolitics, and the evolution of a new vision for Brunei since the year 2007. And I would like to now bring in some few final standardized questions, which will actually allow us to end on a lighter note. So please be a bit concise on this, but the first question would be for both of you. If we are finally allowed to travel again and visit Brunei, what is the place that you would recommend for us to visit, and what should we eat once we are in Brunei, for both of you?
Dr. Vanessa?
Okay, I think with this one I have a prepared answer, but I guess my favorite place in Brunei definitely is a restaurant called Jing Chu that was developed maybe in like, see, Iswandy knows. It was developed in 1946. It was a family-owned restaurant. The most amazing thing about this place, I believe it really has not changed infrastructurally since it was developed in 1946. but is an incredible melting pot of people from younger generation, older generation, just going over, getting some hot tea, so like the milk tea of Brunei, and then toast. And that's a popular toast and eggs. And you can see a lot of people going there every morning, afternoon, even in the evenings. So it's a really amazing melting pot for everyone, especially you cannot miss it if you come to Brunei.
So it's not just about the food, but also the experience package we get with this restaurant. What about you, Iswandy?
Thank you, Vanessa. I might have to go to Jinchu tomorrow than to have my breakfast. I guess it's I mean, places to visit Brunei. I mean, definitely you need to go to the hiking trails or the parks in Brunei. Dr. Vanessa shared about that you need to experience a sunset in Brunei. It's beyond words. It's just beyond words. There are no pictures, there are photos. You have to experience it yourself. I would say it's almost serene on that one. In terms of food, well, we talked about Tabasco just now. So this is maybe the nearest to Tabasco that we have. So I would say it's the nasi katok. It's the nok rice because it has white rice, chicken, and some sambal or sauce. So that might be the Tabasco that we're looking at. So I guess if one day we have our own Tabasco sauce that we export to the world, it must be the nasi katok sauce that we are doing. So Dr. Vanessa, something that we need to work on in the agricultural sector and industry, food industry there.
Yeah.
And what can you recommend us something to read and watch about Brunei? Read or watch?
I think for me, it's like one thing that I usually tap into at least once or twice a week is like maybe things that are launched by Progressive Radio. They come up with like different topics and they touch upon different creatives or, you know, just some interesting topics about Brunei that's happening or events. That's kind of a portal if you want to chime in, maybe in and out for a conversation or anything that launched on their podcast or something. So Progressive Radio is pretty good.
Progressive Radio, thank you. And what about you, Iswandy?
So if people were to Google about Brunei, there's not much news there, basically to understand. But I guess since Brunei coming from my background, so Brunei this year is on an ASEAN chairmanship. So that shows about how Brunei governs, chair the region, and also it also echoes how we govern the country itself. So that warmth, friendly diplomacy, and good relations that we have. So that's something that we are doing also within the country itself. So the government is, even though sometimes it's not any system is perfect, but that doesn't mean that people don't communicate on things to improve here. So for example, if there's a system that doesn't work well, the community will voice out in the newspaper or even to the representative in the legislative council. So I guess that's something to look at is how we chair the ASEAN chairmanship this year.
Okay, yeah, that's a good tip for us. Finally, I'd like to ask both of you whether you would want to ask a question to our next speaker, the speaker of our next episode on Bangladesh.
Oh, yes, please. I've never been to Bangladesh. Always missed by the next country. So it's just a few flights hours away. So my question to the next speaker is, how does Bangladesh balances its culture and modernity in its development? Because I understand it's a country that is strong in culture, but it's also one of the fastest growing country in terms of economy. So that's something that I'm curious about Bangladesh. Excellent
question, Iswandy. What about you, Vanessa?
I guess I kind of have like a specific question, especially thinking about that as well. Like, you know, how Bangladesh having as well a very big agricultural sector, like how are they actually integrating new technologies and new tools into the ecosystem for their smallholder farmers, and, you know, maybe to share potential like challenges or obstacles they face, and then maybe how they've overcome that.
Okay. Well, once again, as we are coming to an end, I would actually like to thank the both of you so much for these great insights today, Honorable Iswandy Ahmad and Dr. Vanessa Teo. And also thanks to all of you who joined us today for this great episode and for the excellent questions, making the discussion even more lively. Our next episode, as we mentioned before, will be on June 17th on Bangladesh. And we hope that you shall all join us for that as well. Have a wonderful day and thank you for being with us today.